With the skills gap increasing, it's more important than ever to train your staff effectively and efficiently. Offensive Security provides training for your organization designed by the same minds behind Kali Linux. Here are two recent offerings from OffSec. OffSec Academy gives you the chance to earn industry-leading OSCP certification with dedicated one-on-one mentoring. You can also try Proving Grounds Enterprise, created exclusively by Offensive Security's InfoSec experts for highly realistic simulated networks. Visit securityweekly.com/offsec to learn more. PlexTrack is the platform that helps cybersecurity practitioners get the daily work done. Red teams can create reports in half the time and track risk to resolution with the blue team. Teams can centralize remediation efforts across all scans, assessments, and audits. Effectively communicate risk in real time through simple visualizations, scanner and ticketing integrations, and robust analytics. PlexTrack is perfect for collaboration across all teams. Visit securityweekly.com/PlexTrack to claim your free month. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Our next live webcast will be on April 29th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, where you'll learn how to prepare for modern ransomware attacks. Say that 10 times fast. Not only prepare, but also hopefully prevent them as well. Jake Williams, Adrian Sanabria, and myself will be doing that. securityweekly.com/webcasts allows you to register. You can check out the full archive at securityweekly.com/on-demand. If you've been in information security for a long time, or maybe just getting your start, you've probably read an article written by Rob Lemos. He writes for Dark Reading and Tech Beacon. He is a veteran technology journalist with more than 25 years experience, a former research engineer. He crunches numbers on various trendy platforms like Python and R. Rob, welcome to the show.
Hey, Paul, how are you?
I'm good. It's nice to have you. I can't tell you how many articles you've written, Rob, that we've probably covered here on the show, so we thank you for that. Rob, how did you get your start? Well, I guess first, how did you get your start in information security? And then I also want to learn about your background in journalism as well.
So they're a little bit the same. I started in journalism. Actually, when I was over in Japan, I wrote for a magazine called Computing Japan, and that was kind of how I cracked into it. And then...
Wait, Rob, when was that?
That was 94.
Wow.
And then I came back in 97 to start working at PC Online, or PC Week Online, which then became ZDNet. Mm-hmm. And I worked there for 4 years until it was bought by CNET, and then worked at CNET until 2005 until I became freelance.
I gotcha. So did you have a background in technology? Are you self-taught or?
I graduated with a double degree in electrical engineering and computer science.
Oh, wow. So yeah, you have a tech background, hence the programming, right?
So he's not smart at all.
But what what drew you towards journal? Here you are in mid to late 90s, right up as the tech bubble's getting ready to ramp up. What made you go the journalism route and not the technologist, straight technology route?
Yeah. So when I was in college, I worked at a semiconductor fabrication facility. It was a lab on campus. And so my paths coming out of college were pretty much all semiconductor fabrication, design, that sort of thing. And I really found out that I didn't want to do that. And so I decided to take a year off and go to Japan. And like many people during that time who did that, I ended up getting stuck there.
Wait, why'd you get stuck there?
It's very, during the 90s, it was, and actually in the 80s, it was very lucrative just to go over there and spend some time as an English teacher or some other occupation like that. And I went over thinking I'd do English teaching for a year. It turns out that it wasn't a good fit. I did some technical rewriting for 9 months before I ended up getting a job at a lab that was part of NTT, which is the AT&T equivalent over in Japan. And they offered me
Nippon Telephone and Telegraph.
Yeah,
Nippon, right?
Yeah, or Nihon, either one. And so I did. They offered me one of two positions. One was either doing semiconductor processing, and the other one was doing computer science. And so I went the computer science direction. And so for 2 years, I did some early AI and machine learning. In my case, it was they had some semiconductors that could produce certain signals depending on what chemicals were in the atmosphere. And so I was tasked with trying to categorize those using an array of sensors. And so there's actually, if you go out online, you can probably dig up a paper or two that I have my name on from that time.
And so what drew you to security, Rob?
So when I started at ZDNet, I'm trying to remember, what was Melissa, 99? Or was it 97?
Well, then where was
the
I?
Melissa virus was kind of probably the start. And maybe there was a couple things before that. But
Yeah, it was
Melissa
like 99, 2000. You're right. Was Melissa. Yeah.
And then I Love You was right after that, right?
Yep.
So I did a lot of work on that. And because of my background, I was able to do some reverse engineering it was a Word document. So, and it wasn't too technical at that point. Was able to grab some information about it, report on that information, and that kind of sealed the deal. And, for me, with a computer science background, I had a lot of interest in sort of the historical. I mean, from Alan Turing to John von Neumann. Neumann was one of the founders of computer science, and he came up with cellular automata theory and some of the self-propagation theories. It's I think a lot of that was very interesting, and so I kind of had a lot of interest in worms and viruses, and a lot of that was historical, but also what was being done at the time.
When were you confident that you could write really well?
Still no.
That's usually the answer, right? And I think it's much later than people realize. And I want to encourage people, coming in the field or want to write. It takes a long time, I think, before you feel comfortable and proficient with it, right?
Yeah, and there's always the new form, right? So you start out, and even hitting like 300 words seems difficult, and then you come up with a form. I mean, I do 5 times a week. I do a 700 to 800 word article, and
wow.
It's there's for news articles, there's a few formulas, and you know what details you need to get, and what quotes you need, how to expand it out, how to drill down on details. And so it's that part. I think I had a backhanded compliment once that was my writing's very workmanlike, which I kind of take pride in. I've done it enough that it comes out smooth. And I there's a lot. I'm working a little dabbling in the fiction side now.
Nice.
And there's the same thing. There's formulas there. The people who tend to get in trouble are the ones who don't really stick to the formulas. Their first time around. It's you need to get a little bit of writing under your belt, I think, before you start venturing off those paths.
You think the fiction writing helps you with the technical writing, or vice versa? They kind of play off each other?
I think if I was a different kind of journalist, it would. I mean, I've done my share of narrative journalism, but there's a very slim market for that. Most people don't want to invest, a 20 minutes or 30 minutes in reading an article. So there's not as big of a market for that. And so I tend not to go in that direction. And while I've played around with different ideas for nonfiction books that would be narrative journalism, that is a labor of love. Usually those don't. It's a hard way to make a living.
How do you? So you say you're writing 500 to 700 words 5 times a week?
Yeah, I do 20,000 to 30,000 words a month.
How do you deal with writer's block? Or you just do you still deal with that?
I do, yeah. But so the best way to deal with it, and or at least for me, what works for me is I do sprints. So I do a 30-minute sprint is my typical one, 10-minute break. Crank out so in 2-hour chunks, I can do 3 writing sprints. And so you can generally...
You're talking a writing sprint, not like a physical go out and run sprint, right?
Right. Yes. A writing sprint. Like a DevOps sprint.
Yeah, you'd break it up into smaller chunks. Yeah, that's sound advice.
And so, writer's block, right. So the way to get around writer's block is you start your sprint and then you start writing.
Right.
And, my kids know that you can edit crap. That's the mantra around here. So you get it out, and then once you have something on the paper, you can do something with it.
Yeah,
if you don't have anything on the paper, there's nothing you can do.
Yeah.
So the point of you can polish a turd is in fact actually true.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yes. There's many different ways of saying that, but yeah.
Yes. Tyler?
So I'm curious, what are some of your harder journalistic adventures you've done in your plethora of careers? Like, what's some of the harder ones you've had to write about? I've read a lot of your stuff, so I was trying to think
the
through,
hard stuff is when you are trying to dig into something that people don't want you to dig into, right? So, a good way. I think Brian Krebs has a good end run around that, which is he gets the details first, and then goes to the company, and they have to comment. But I'm not. He developed. In 2009, he was working at the Washington Post. Then became, it was already starting to do his look in the underground forums. He taught or learned Russian on his own. So that he could be down there, and he basically got the details before a lot of companies knew.
He developed a lot of sources. Rob, do you have sources, or is your kind of journalism slightly different from?
So I would consider my journalism more kind of explanatory journalism.
Yeah.
I have the deep technical knowledge, and so I try to find stories that other people might not know about because they're technical.
Yeah, I find myself in the position that I'm in, and many of us here in the show, like, I don't know if I have time to go read that paper and that other paper and then think about it hard enough to be able to explain it in simple terms on the show. But Rob wrote an article, so I'm going to use that. So thank you.
Oh, thanks. I'm glad I helped.
But that's kind of your style, right?
Made up. It's that word I made up, Paul. Plagiarism.
Well, I mean, it's a shortcut. I would argue, right? Because Rob, you go read those technical papers and do exactly that, right? Like, there's, you can send a back channel, segmented network communications by varying the fan speed and understanding all those details, and then you come up with an article that a lot of us can understand and read, which is great.
Right. Yeah, I mean, to go back to your original question, so when I was nearing graduation with my double major and not really wanting to go in that direction, and then working in research for 2 years, kind of taught me that focusing on a single problem in very minute detail was not what I wanted to do. I like the fact that if I have, say, interest in Bitcoin, and you probably have this as well, that I can call up, 2, 3, 4 people who are experts on Bitcoin, talk to them, dig through papers, and then write something up at the end of all that and get paid for it. And that, to me, is a great position to be in. Yeah.
I use everyone, sitting here and on remotely when I find stories to go, wait, so tell me about this because you're the expert in this area, right? You need those types of sources. It's a different type of source is what you're saying, Rob.
Yeah, and I go to, or I've gone to the WISE conference, the workshop on the economics of information security. Black Hat and DEF CON, of course, RSA. I've been to the Usenix conferences, and actually, every year now I still virtually go. And those are a gold mine of what's going on. And I tend to like the academic papers a little bit more because even though they're a little more detail oriented and might not have the big impact of
That's the word.
Well,
they're
yeah,
dry and boring. They're dry and boring, is what you're saying, Rob. Right?
They're bringing the state of the art forward one baby step at a time, right? Most of the time. But then there's papers that, I mean, so Semantic ended up doing one with, I'm trying to remember, I think it might have been Stanford. And this was like in 2011, where they went and looked at vulnerabilities and the malware from their database, and they were able to find malware that was using vulnerabilities before those vulnerabilities were announced. So thus they were zero-day attacks, and so they found, I believe it was 7 new ones that way, and also came up with the curve, essentially, that initially usage is very low of those exploits. And then after they become public, it goes up sometimes by 5 orders of magnitude. And that was one of the best papers I've seen in a long time. And of course, they never have done really anything to add on to that. But it was, at the time, it was really good.
Do you also get frustrated like I do when you read studies and statistics and find that most of them are just like, you're not looking at that. You're feeding a narrative, and you have so much bias that there's a lot of that. It's not just me, right?
No, there's a lot of it. And that's, I push back a lot on surveys, but for me, at the end of the day, I have to either write an article on it or not write an article on it. And when I write an article on it, I try to make it at least kind of point out the deficiencies in the especially surveys, right? Surveys are they're not very well done, and even the ones that are well done, as we've seen through a couple of elections, tend to be pretty bad.
Yeah, tend to be pretty biased, right?
Yeah. I mean, and some of them have. So you look at what news is, and news is reporting a lot on. I mean, people want to read about conflict, they want to read about threats, and that's pretty much what cybersecurity is for the most part. I think there's been, over the last 5 years, maybe a little pushback on that and trying to focus more on the defensive. But, for the longest time, it was all threats. And, it worked out both for the cybersecurity companies and for, the publications, I think.
In threats, recently, you talk about the past 5 years, have increasingly gone more geopolitical and nation state based. How have you kind of dealt with that? Have you had to do more research or take different angles? Because Rob, like 10, 15 years ago, we weren't really talking much about the nation state threats. And today it's several times a week there's articles being written on it.
Yeah, I'll have to look it up. I think it was 2007, 6 or something. I wrote the myth of cyber terrorism piece, or no, it actually was 2004 because I was still at CNET, talking about how there was a lot of talk, at that time they rolled out the cyber Pearl Harbor and everything, and how those were overblown. And now we're here where, I don't think cyber terrorism necessarily is on the horizon, because I think there are more, if you want to terrorize someone, there's better ways of doing it. But it definitely nation state after specific goals. We've seen that, and I think Stuxnet was obviously a big one, where we had a specific goal and to delay Iran's nuclear processing facilities or capabilities, and you have deniability. And I think that's, and now more and more, I think we're playing on the edges of the deniability part, because I think we've seen a few false flag operations now, whereas before we could get the attribution fairly correct the first time around. Now, I think we've revised a few anyways. So nation states it's very hard to cover, because the other fact of the matter is that businesses don't want to comment on whether a nation state is behind the attack, because they don't want to be wrong, and because it probably is really bad business.
But the readers want to read something from Rob Lemos that says, well, Robert Norcon said it was China. And we like saying, like, we like being able to point that finger and go, it's China. Right. And you're saying, and I think all of us will agree, like, dude, you don't know who it is, to be quite honest. The end of it.
And that's, looking at the future, that is, accountability is going to be the number one problem, and a big part of that is attribution. So if we can't attribute things, then we can't hold anybody accountable, and you don't really have a deterrence then.
Rob, have you authored books? Because if you had, I apologize, I haven't read them.
I have not, no.
Is that in the cards? Because I've read books from journalists covering cybersecurity and mixed results. A lot of great ones and like some not so great ones. So I mean, if you're going to do that, I would read it. Just throwing that out there.
Yeah, well, I've thought about it, and I don't think. I mean, the book I would do, I think, would be more on the evolution of code, and the code being used and the exploits being used and that sort of thing. Less about, I think, I don't know. I look at the books that try to pull a fine-honed story out of events.
Yeah,
and
some have done that really well. I mean, did you read Zetter's book on Stuxnet? I thought Kim did a great job with that.
Yep.
But others have fallen short of the mark. Just saying, not going to say who they are, right?
Yeah.
So when it's a tough thing to do. It's a tough to get. It's as they say, people who know stuff don't talk, and people who talk typically don't know. And so it becomes very hard to kind of get the real story if you're even looking. I mean, a lot of I think journalists go in with I've done my initial reporting, and this is a story that I think is there. They pitch their publication on that. They say, sure, yeah, the publisher wants the story, and then they go and they try to fill in all the gaps. And so they've already kind of at that point figured out what they think the story is. I don't know. And then, you have to decide, you want heroes in your story, right? So you have to pick a few people out of what generally is massive efforts to do something, right?
Right. You need characters, conflict, and resolution.
Yep.
But in it also, there's so many characters when you talk about even just Stuxnet as an example. So many characters in that story.
Yeah.
But your pitch is more about software. Is it more about the exploit market? Because that's an interesting angle. Like how that's changed.
I've tried to crack that a little bit over time. It's tough because no one really wants to talk about it.
Yeah. And those that do, they end up a chapter in a book and articles here and there, but it's almost like you're right. We can't get enough information to really have a concrete story because you run into roadblocks.
Right. I mean, you have Zerodium occasionally making announcements that they're paying, $5 billion for exploits. No, I think their last one was 1.5.
Right. You never truly know, though.
Or what was it? The PHP one was.
Oh, it was. They called out Zerodium, right?
Yeah, no, they put it like some stuff in the code, like comments sold to Zerodium on.
Yeah.
Like epic troll or no.
Nice.
So I have a. Yeah, I was just wondering. You've been doing this a while. Digital or print? Which do you prefer?
Digital or print? I really have not been much of a print journalist. I mean, so Computing Japan was a print publication, and then when was it? 1996. I decided I was coming back from Japan. And so I went and I talked with, at the time, you probably remember these guys, Byte Magazine.
Oh, loved Byte Magazine. I did. I'm a huge fan. Subscribed.
PC Week and their telecom version, which Telecom Week, I forget what it was, but and so the guys over at Ziff Davis told me, well, we filled the position for PC Week, but we know you probably don't want to do this, but we have this online opportunity out in San Francisco. And I was like, yeah, I'll do it. And at that time, it was still, the print publication was looking down on the online publication.
Yeah, they were like, oh, look how cute those online publications are. How things have changed.
Journalists are in print.
Yeah, we were writing like 2 articles a day and...
getting paid less than the print people probably.
Probably. But, when Ziff Davis went public, we ended up getting stock options that ended up not becoming worth that much later.
But
There was it was a difficult transition. Days. It was a difficult transition from print to
it was also weird,
Yeah.
The journalist, owning stock options. What's going on?
Right.
We're at least the traditional view of a journalist is, working in the trenches and working overtime and everything. So
I mean, print's pretty much, is print completely dead for tech, you think?
For tech, yeah, I think so.
For everything?
For a lot
for
of things?
Everything? No. I mean, there's some I think fashion publications. There's what's that couple that does the the Fixer Upper Magnolia, right?
Yeah.
For them, paper, it's all about the paper, making it look beautiful.
Chip and Joanna Gaines, my wife's a huge fan.
Magnolia, yeah.
Yep.
No, that's really
and those are the magazines that you have in the bathroom.
Quite possibly. Yes.
And that's the one thing that I found that's interesting too is we used to have the jokes with good friend Mike Poor that he destroyed his share of Kindles because what do? You go to the bathroom and you drop the deuce and you put the Kindle on the back of the toilet and you hop in the shower and the moisture then goes inside your Kindle and kills the Kindle. He killed more Kindles that way. But now what's the best reading room in the house? And what do you read on?
Your phone.
Yep.
And then you go in your car and you listen.
Yep.
So
I still use the Kindle at night
to read.
It doesn't hurt my eyes reading.
Yeah.
Do you think that's a good question though, Rob. Do you think there's new mediums beyond reading that will ever kind of displace or start to shift the market again? We talk, well, of course there's podcast and video, but you think people are always going to want to read something, even if it's on a digital device or have it read to them?
Yeah, so I am a reader. I don't like, I watch some video. I listen to a few podcasts, but I don't have a commute, so I don't really.
Yeah.
Most of us
Watch
these days don't have a commute, but
watch yourself.
And so, I mean, for me, I can crunch through words pretty quickly, whereas a video has to be at the speed of the person talking, obviously. Unless you're listening to something like Coursera, where you can stick it at 1.25 or 1.5x and get through a little faster that way.
Yep.
Started as a silly question in my mind, but it's actually a serious question.
And I know he has a question in here too. So
because Paul often talks about the fact that he reads books by listening to them. Are online news sources like dark reading, are they available in an audio version?
Good question. I know that they have some video and radio segments that they do.
Yeah, most outlets do because the barrier to entry is so low.
Right.
Do they? I mean, because we do news every week, and we're always looking at print. They're not print articles; they're digital articles. But I was just curious whether functionally illiterate people like Paul have to do the audio version. Yeah, there was something.
I'm still learning how to read, Jeff. It's a struggle.
Yeah, me too. I was looking at something just either today or yesterday where it was an article that I was reading, but it also had a video attached to it. And so I'm like, and I don't usually do the videos. That's just me. I would rather read my news than watch the video segment or whatever. And it might have just been a podcast recording. I think it was just a recording. So, but for some reason I clicked on it because I thought that it was an interesting enough article, whatever it was. But it was just somebody reading the article. So it was an audio version of the article. So it must be out there.
But you don't write to have it read. You write to have people read it, Rob, right? There's a difference.
Yeah, though, when you write, I think to some extent, like especially in the final pass, I'll read it in my head, and you can kind of figure out if there are cadence issues or
right.
And writers love cheap alliteration, right? So
Yeah,
gotta get that in there a few times.
You gotta have the hook. You gotta keep them engaged. Agreed. Lee, did you have a question for Rob?
No, well, actually, I was wondering if there was places that he was finding print was still favored over electronic or digital, where there is, or maybe the other end. Where did you see the adoption first? Was it in the U.S. or was it overseas?
Of electronic?
Mm-hmm.
Over in Japan at the time. So one of my final jobs there. So I did the Computing Japan stint for about a year and a half, and then they were having troubles, and so I ended up going back to kind of the company that I had worked with at the lab, and they had me doing kind of engineering management, so some international engineering management. I'd come to the States and help localize some products, and some of those products were, if you remember, PCM CIA cards.
Oh yeah.
So the PC cards that were modems, and so they were definitely, in some cases, on the cutting edge, but it was at that point U.S. technology. So I think that, and if I remember, Computing Japan was a print publication that eventually put its issues online. And already in the United States, I think it was much more, aside from having AOL, but you had ZDNet and then CNET soon after. So, I think the transition was happening over in the U.S. faster. I think they really, we took it and ran with it.
Rob, I want to go back down memory lane to 2003 when you were writing about the blaster worm, and you won an award actually for that in 2003. I mean, was that expected in any way, shape, form, or fashion, or you're just like, hey,
No.
I was doing my job and it just so happened, or?
So CNET every year would pick, 5 or we would all suggest articles or series or features for the national awards. And so to kind of rank things, this is one underneath the Pulitzer, right? So, so it was the National Sigma Delta Chi Awards, and they put out, I think, maybe it just hit the national consciousness at that point with worms and everything. Because
2003 was a big year for worms.
Yeah, I think NIMDA happened a couple years before, and then after Blaster, you had Slammer.
Yep.
You just don't get good worms anymore.
I know.
What's that?
We're definitely reminiscent, Jeff, for sure. Like, those were the days. There was worms running around.
Well,
it was glorious.
They're still with us. I mean, Conficker, you stick any sensor on the internet, and
you still find Conficker. Yeah.
I mean, what was the more recent one that I was talking to someone they were still seeing? I mean, Slammer. I think you still see.
Slammer.
So yeah. Anyway, I wrote nine articles in a week in 5 days, and
on just Blaster.
Yeah, it was just hit the latest news in the morning.
Yep.
Do a follow up in the evening. Come back the next day and do it again. And then there was another writer who is now Ina Fried, who so she was working with me on a couple of the articles. So we both got the award. But it was cranking out articles. And again, some of it was explanatory. Others, a couple of the articles I think were more narrative form. But really, I think it was just that worms hit the national consciousness at that point. Because it was weird being at the award ceremony, because you're getting up there and here's someone who just did a series on AIDS and poverty, and here I am with this computer worm, right?
It did get a lot. It
seemed less important.
Yeah, but it got a lot of mainstream, because I remember being interviewed on the news and stuff like that, working for university around that time, and I think that was the first time it really garnered that kind of level of popular culture and attention.
Yeah. Well, it was hitting everywhere. So, I mean, I think the Melissa virus got it just because of the human interest story.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it was interesting. And before that, you had what, Brain in '86.
Oh yeah, there's a whole history there for sure.
Yeah. So,
are there ones that like articles you've written and stuff you've done where you're like, I really wish people had paid more attention to? Like, you won the award for Blaster, right? That was big news at the time. But there are other things you're like, I was really like digging this, and it just didn't garner any interest.
I don't know. I mean, that cyber terrorism article, the myth of cyber terrorism article, I wrote because it was kind of pushing back a lot of people. There was, especially in the news at the time, I'm trying to remember the actual details. There was a dam in, I think it wasn't the Hoover Dam, but it was somewhere out in that area, that had suffered a computer issue.
Yeah, I think
and a lot of people were blaming it on, and at the same time you had, in Australia, there was a contractor that got really mad at a township there and
released sewage. Is that the sewage? That's the sewage one, right?
Yeah. So, that one I liked because it was trying to bring a little bit of reality to, all the hype that was being thrown around at the time.
And raw sewage draws a particular visual and even smell when people read that, right? I mean, that's catchy. Talk about being catchy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but the sewage had already been covered, I think. The details that I got in talking to the prosecutor at the time regarding that attack on the server that was in the dam the electric generator part was enlightening. I mean, just the hacker really hadn't gotten anywhere close to any of the controls, but it was already being brought up in Congress as a potential, cyber terrorism. This is what hackers could do. And for me, I think it was important because, it was at the time when most people didn't understand what hackers were, that they weren't all bad, or most of them even weren't bad. And they were trying to, paint them with a very wide brush. And there were, lots of threats of going after them with both barrels and not really kind of considering the ramifications.
Rob, what's it like today? I mean, is there like, do you have to choose? Like, there's so much cybersecurity news that, like, basically you gotta be choosy, or are there more journalists now where you've got to kind of have a unique angle on it, or is it kind of a mix?
Well, so part of the answer to that question is that I'm a freelancer. So my options in some ways are more limited in that if there's breaking news, I don't always get to jump on it, right? Staff writers might jump on it. So for me, I have to kind of find either the hidden stories or, a nugget in a report released by a company that seems interesting, or a scientific paper that no one's going to look at. So there's a lot of news out there. As I said, I'm writing 4 to 5 articles a week. And I really don't have any shortage of stuff to write about.
Helps if I turn my mic on. Where do you find like some of your best sources, like in general, right? Is it more academic papers? Is it more reading between the lines, or you kind of always flopping back and forth between just finding what's interesting?
So sources meaning
like not people sources, but
the origin of the article.
Yeah.
Well, for me, I think probably a third of them come from data sources, so reports and that sort of thing.
Yep.
Trying to think, probably not a third, but maybe a quarter come from like academic papers, and then a lot, probably half and half for the rest, come either from my interest in a particular trend, and then the other half is looking at announcements from companies and seeing something in there that is of interest to me.
Is it sometimes people that are like, Rob, you should write about this. Like, this is really cool.
Rarely.
Interesting.
I don't, if it's a third party who is likely unbiased, then maybe I'll listen to them. Usually, I don't know what you get, but I get like 100 to 300 emails a day. And
oh my God, I'm right there with you. It's nice to talk to someone else that is in that same boat, because there's a rare gem in those, and most of it's just, sometimes I'm like, why do I even bother reading these? Right? Because it's just basically, I'll say it, it's every security solutions provider, vendor that wants you to cover some angle that has to relate back to their stuff, right?
Right. And I mean, the other problem is the marketing is getting so good now, or the PR people are getting so good now that they're making it seem like, even though they're sending out a mass email, that they're just sending it to you. So I feel really bad sometimes, because I don't know, I probably answer maybe 24 in a day, and everything else I kind of just archive, and it makes me feel like not a nice person to do that.
I know. Yeah, because I agree. Sometimes I'm like, maybe we should engage. What makes you engage with people? They email you. What are in those dozen or half a dozen or so? Like, what is it that piques your interest?
Short, specific, an interesting nugget. Not saying, did you see this? Not saying, did you see this article? And the article happens to be mine. Yeah, that's always that's always a tell that they didn't actually, or they're not sending it specifically to me. They're sending it to a group of people,
or has nothing to do with cybersecurity whatsoever. Those are the easy ones.
Yeah, those are the easy ones. I mean, I consider those just kind of junk mail at this point. But I've talked to, if you talk to a few congressmen at any point, you end up getting like their entire coalition's worth of emails. So, yeah.
I'm curious, how are you organizing and like curating the multiple sources and articles and projects you're working on? What's your kind of workflow look like?
And also your validation, Rob, because I've been bit by that a couple of times too. Like, oh crap, that's not real. You've been there, I know you have.
I'm trying to think. I'm very careful on the validation side.
Yeah.
For me, because I'm not really a deadline journalist anymore. So for me, if it takes an extra day to
validate,
get confirmation.
Yeah, I agree. Sometimes we get in trouble. Like, we'll cover a story, and then on rare occasions, I'll have to be like, "Oh, by the way, that story we covered last week, right? Because we're a regular weekly cadence, right? But you'll spend the extra time.
So we have a deadline.
Yeah. So, in terms of I have a text file. It's just a markdown document that I put my ideas for the next week or two in. And that's kind of how I do that. I mean, I also use, just a normal, not the Mac version, but a normal contact manager, and put in some extra information in there for sources. But I mean, I hate to say it, but a lot of my organization is in my email. So I'll, you mark things important that you want to get back to later. If I need to find a source for a particular company, I'll just search for the company in my email inbox.
And usually they've spammed you. Yeah.
Yes, many times.
Yeah.
So.
Unrelated, today being April 1st, today's the day you can't believe anything you read on the internet.
I think that's every day, man.
Well, I mean,
the internet ruined April Fools for me.
But today, in my opinion, is even worse. And I got nailed once today. I totally admit it. Like, I got an email in my inbox, and it said, your purchase order XXX is out for delivery. And it's from a company that I've bought from before. And I'm like, shit, what did I order? Did I have one too many gin and tonics and order something?
Oh, dude, and I went all the time.
And I went and exactly.
And stuff will just show up, and I'm like,
and I clicked on it, and it says April Fools. But while you're here, do you need anything? I'm like, Son of a... Actually, I do. And the other one that, which was interesting, was another company that I dealt with had said something along the lines of your $7,321 order has been approved. And I'm like, what? And I click, and April Fools and, all that stuff. And then about an hour later, I get an email back another email from that same company, and said, sorry, it was an April Fool's joke. It was sent in an attempt of good humor, and apparently they got taken on the coals for it.
Yeah, because phishing is like April Fool's every day.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I wonder if April Fool's is a particularly good day to launch a phishing campaign.
Yeah, I mean, every day is a good day for a phishing campaign, I guess. True. Rob, do you worry that you'll be targeted by attackers? Like, you have to have a certain level of OPSEC?
Yeah, I do. I guess my main worry is if I'm ever targeted by a nation-state attacker, right?
Yeah.
But so when I had a WordPress blog, that got hit a few times.
That happens.
When I didn't quickly update it.
You're not alone.
Yeah. I actually, let's see, so trying to think, probably a half a year after the Equifax breach, I got, I forget what the actual name of it is, but I got 3 decked out iPhones in the mail for Verizon. Someone had apparently used my information to order those, so I had to, and luckily I was, I'm home, so I was able to get those before whoever was supposed to pick them up.
Interesting.
So that was interesting. Oh, and I was had unemployment insurance or unemployment fraud.
A lot of us have. That's pretty common too.
I got a letter in the mail saying, "Hey, just confirming your application for unemployment," and I had to call 3 different agencies to make sure that it wasn't going to happen.
For point of record, was that within the last year, or was that previously?
Oh, it was in it was
in 2020.
2020. Yeah. So that
happens
the same happened to me in 2020. Yeah, I mean, it apparently has happened to a ton of people.
But Rob, have you ever been on a story where you're like, people don't want me to write about this, or do you tend to stick with more like research kind of mainstream kind of stuff?
Yeah, I haven't had the Brian Krebs experience of
getting swatted, and it's not just Brian, right? I mean, there's a lot of journalists that have delved into stuff that like people don't want you lifting up those covers and looking in those dark corners, right?
Yeah, I've had probably in my career a few talks with. There was one time when I think it was during the late 90s, early aughts that I ended up having a conversation with the NSA. But
who'd you talk to?
Yeah, was that a comfortable or uncomfortable? I guess when they call you, it's
no. They bring you to the Cryptologic Museum, and they talk about how they have the best interests of the country at heart, and they would like a heads up when you write an article like that in the future, type thing.
Oh, interesting. So I always envision it as like a room in some undisclosed location with a folding chair and like just the light bulb kind of swinging on a chain, right?
No, I think the museum, the museum is their version of that. I don't know, but.
Well, there's a story about that, but I guess I don't know. Do you want to hear it? Yeah,
that was like a hotel or something, right?
Yeah, the museum is currently housed in what used to be called the Colony 7. I think it was the name of it. It was a motel that just happened to be right outside of the headquarters building at NSA. So it was very common for visitors to get a room at this Colony 7 motel. And I'm not sure what the dates are, but at some point NSA just purchased the place and operated it as a motel for quite a few years for VIPs and visitors and guests and whatnot.
To spy on them. That's me, not Jeff talking, by the way.
Whatever.
In case you're listening, NSA.
Whatever. Oh, they're listening. Come on.
They're listening in real time, though. They don't have to wait for the recording.
Just kidding, NSA. Just kidding. But at some point, that wasn't a cost. They did it as a cost savings measure initially. It was cheaper for them to operate a motel essentially
than to pay the expenses. Yeah,
than to pay the expenses. But at some point, it wasn't cost effective anymore. So they had this real estate. So they turned it into a national cryptologic museum, which has been closed to the public for like a year now. But the last time I was there, and I don't know what the current status is, but they're in the process of building an entirely new building, blown out, so you're not walking through an old motel. The Cryptologic Museum someday soon will be a full-fledged building in and of itself.
A full-fledged interrogation area with the dark rooms and the folding chairs.
And I might be in it. You never know.
It's awesome.
Oh, jeez. And Jeff might be in it.
So, Rob, what are you most excited about, like, next in terms of like, or do you kind of like go week by week and like something new is going to break in cybersecurity, or are there things you're like excited about that are emerging?
I mean, there's things that I definitely keep an eye on. I mean, I think one thing that's fairly close, near and dear to my heart is privacy. There's been multiple, I don't know if you remember in the 1990s, there was Zero Knowledge Systems. I think they were out of Montreal. They were trying to do, kind of certificate-based privacy, so you can certify things like you're old enough to drink alcohol, and you don't have to hand over your license. You don't have to, let people know your actual age and that sort of thing. And so they,
like an NFT ID. We were just talking about that kind of stuff in the previous segment, right? Like a crypto
or a vaccination card. It's
like a blockchain certified, which is interesting. Right. You're saying this was in the 90s.
Yeah, there's a guy named Stefan Brandt, I think, who had some patents that they had worked with him, and then he ended up moving to Microsoft, I believe, in the aughts, and they started doing I don't know if they had their passport thing, right? So they were trying to do sort of a similar thing. And now we have Tim Berners-Lee doing Solid, and through his company Inrupt. Solid is the web pod, data pod technology. So it's basically multi-level access control. So you, for instance, would put your information on your computer and allow certain companies to access it. And when you don't want them to access it, you turn that off. And so it allows you to, for instance, when I'm looking for a car, I can suddenly turn on, hey, I want car providers or car sellers to be able to access this part of my information. And then when you're done, you turn that off, and suddenly, hopefully, all the spam stops, and you don't have to deal with car sellers.
Your warranty has expired.
Yeah, well, just the sellers bothering you all the time, right?
No, I love the opt-in model, and that sounds like a really even better solution to just opt in. It's a system that allows you to opt in and opt out based on what your kind of habits and needs are at that time.
Right. And it solves the data bank problem, because you don't need, while there will probably be companies that manage your information, you will be the customer to them, which is what we really need, because right now there's people that collect your information and you're not their customer.
We need to control our information, and those are the regulations and systems I like to see that allow the consumer to control their information in terms of who it's shared with and for how long.
Right. And I think what's happening is we're seeing a lot of the regulations come online that are much more stringent than they used to be. And so it's becoming more expensive for companies to keep too much information. So, data minimization is a big thing within companies now. And you don't want to be breached with a lot of information, because you're going to get penalized for it.
Absolutely. Any more questions for Rob from the crew?
None for me.
I have one more question.
Jeff,
have you ever considered doing any ghostwriting?
I do ghostwriting.
You do ghostwriting.
Yes.
See that? That makes perfect sense.
Ghostwriting. Probably
I wanna
I would say
I want to be ghosted.
you want to be ghosted.
That's different.
Right,
That's something
seen
totally different.
Completely different.
Oh, Rob, another question I had for you that just came back to me was, are there, I don't want to talk about companies that are like difficult to get information out of, but I like to highlight the ones that are easy to work with. I'll give you an example. We work with Microsoft sometimes in their PR teams, and they're able to place people on our shows, and they're great to work with, right? In that capacity. I'm saying maybe you work with Microsoft and they're not great to work with. But like, are there companies that are really great to work with? I would also, and I'll say this, and I won't put words in your mouth, but like Apple's super difficult to work with when it comes to cybersecurity, and I've just gleaned that from doing this for 15 years. Like I can tell you that. But like, what are the good ones? What are the ones that in security companies, ones that are like really awesome to work with?
Well, I'm not going to name any companies, but I'll throw them into a couple of buckets. One, I think the small companies generally are, especially if they're small security companies, are generally really good to work with.
Yeah, they have like security researchers and technical people usually that are willing to share. Yeah.
And I like the ones where I frankly like the startups, because you typically get the guy who's working, has their hands deep in the guts of security. And
yeah,
so you're
you do
able
a
to
briefing, you get
answers.
the person who's the CEO, the founder, and the person that developed the tech all in one shot.
Right. I mean, the person, marketing has its functions, but I don't want to talk to the chief marketing officer.
Yeah, it's a different experience than the person that had the vision and the technical chops to create it, right?
Yeah. So I agree with
And
Apple. They're kind of hard.
Yeah, right.
I mean, that's yet sometimes we end up with marketing people on our show. it's very disturbing.
It happens. I mean, they have their contributions, but sometimes it's not what you're after, right?
Right.
Sometimes it is. But in your role, I can see it not always being
right. If you're a product, if it's someone in product marketing, they generally know the product pretty well. So it can be good for your show, or if I don't think I'm ever doing an explanatory article like that. But I've had to quote my share of those.
Awesome stuff, Rob. So Rob, we talked about your all the places you've written for in the past and in your history. If people are like, I want to go read some of Rob's articles, where do they go to today to find where you're writing?
So Dark Reading, Tech Beacon, and I've actually started writing a little bit for HP's Enterprise Next.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Rob, thank you so much for appearing on Paul Security Weekly. Yeah,
thanks for inviting me.
And with that, coming up next, we've got some sagas to tell. FreeBSD and Ubiquity. All that and more coming up next.